Today on the Caucus, debt negotiations enter the final stretch. John Harwood and Michael Shear discuss the political landscape, and op-ed columnist Ross Douthat on the Republican strategy.
I've asked leaders of both parties to come here to the White House on Thursday so we can build on the work that's already been done and drive towards a final agreement.
So, Michael, the president's invited congressional leaders of both parties to the White House to try to make some progress in these deficit reduction talks. Is there any reason to think they can make progress this week?
Well, interestingly, the president was quite optimistic in very brief remarks. The timeline that he defined was the next couple of weeks.
And I don't want to fool anybody. We still have to work through some real differences.
It remains to be seen, though, how far they can actually get in the process. There's been an awful lot of starting and stopping in this process, and it hasn't gone very smoothly.
I've heard from some Democratic staffers that Republicans in the last few days have shown somewhat more flexibility. That might be the progress the president was referring to. I wonder how much you think that is affected by, first of all, the president's more aggressive tone last week in his news conference, and then some of the editorial commentary. USA Today, in an editorial, said talking to Republicans about taxes was like talking to the Taliban. David Brooks, our colleague, in his New York Times op-ed said Republican fanaticism might be responsible for a default that would flow if we don't raise the debt limit. How much does that put heat on Republicans who are sort of famous for disregarding the media?
I think you can overstate that a little bit because, frankly, an awful lot of Republicans aren't looking to the New York Times to define their or USA Today to define their strategy. So, on the other hand, you did see a little bit of cracks. You had Senator McCain and Senator Cornyn of Texas, both Republicans, leading Republicans, looking like they were giving a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit.
Could you share with us what sort of revenue raisers might be okay with you?
No.
You're no fun.
It could be that the president saw that, had his tough press conference last week, saw a little bit of give this weekend, and is hoping that that maybe they can make some more progress this week.
It sounds as if, at least at the explicit level, they've tried to keep some maneuvering room.
Right, and that's in some ways what's maddening to the American public about the Washington process, right? Is that at some level it's all about the finesse, how they can get to where they want to go despite the promises that seem on the surface anyway to be pretty clear. But clearly the Republicans are looking for a way to kind of reach some sort of accommodation that doesn't end in calamity.
Now, one of the things that's interesting to me is whether or not the leaders of the Republican Party really can lead their caucus. I've had some indications from the White House that they think there is more ability on the part of John Boehner and Mitch McConnell to get their members to where they need to go than has been led on by the talk about the Republican caucus being out of control. What's your sense of that?
The question is, how much are they in control of what happens in the Republican House, and how much is John Boehner in control? I think the White House would like to believe that if it's John Boehner who is ultimately in control and can get that group of his members to kind of go along with whatever he negotiates, that's better for the White House, because I think they feel like the two of them in a room can actually reach some sort of accommodation. If it's not him, if the caucus is driving what John Boehner has to do, it makes everything more difficult.
The Democrats have one big advantage in this debt deficit negotiation, and that is a single leader, the President of the United States. Republicans don't have a president. They don't have a nominee. How do the passions surrounding this issue affect the scramble for people to become the Republican nominee?
These Republican nominations, the race for a presidency, they often center around a single big issue, or they come down to a moment that defines the race.
Democrats in the Iraq War in 2003.
Exactly, Democrats in the Iraq War. This feels like it's building to that kind of moment like that, where the Republican nominees for president are going to be dragged kicking and screaming perhaps into this big debate over what to do and how to do it, even if maybe they want to be 1,000 miles away.
Op-ed columnist Ross Douthat on the Republican strategy as they enter final negotiations.
I think what we're seeing is a replay in many ways of the way negotiations played out over the government shutdown earlier this year. Both sides, but especially the Republican leadership, sees a strong incentive in letting the negotiations go down to the wire. It's the best way they have to assuage their base. And I think that there are clearly Republicans in the House who are simply irreconcilable and who see their incentives as being better to lose valiantly. I don't think that describes the entirety of the House Republican caucus. And I think you have three tactical things going on here, right? You have one, the Republican sense that they're in a relatively strong position at the moment. So you have a Republican leadership that's willing to sort of push the envelope. And frankly, so far, every time they've pushed the envelope, the White House has come back with concessions, which gives them a reason to push further still. There's the tactical element of House Republicans worried about primary challenges in the future. And finally, you have the sort of bigger picture. If Barack Obama is reelected, all of the Bush tax cuts are scheduled to expire. And you can imagine a scenario where just by sort of doing nothing and accepting gridlock, the White House allows those tax cuts to expire and you have a massive net tax increase. So against that backdrop, I think Republicans have a strong, again, tactical incentive to get the most they can right now, since they don't know what they'll be able to get if Obama is reelected.